It's very because
it's something that you don't control.
In some districts,
I see that's supposed to help us.
He happens to work in LAUSD. One is a former employee of LAUSD, and they're going to share with us some of the insights with regards to what they know about the district. Okay? And then you'll have a chance to ask them some questions as well. John, and I'm not sure if you're either. Yes, thank you. Shauna, David, John, Fox, yes, and Darnice Williams. These are four of my doctoral dissertation students. Darnice actually still works in the district, and Shauna is a former, as of 3 months ago?
As a 3 months
former employee. What I shared with the four of them is that we've asked Superintendent Brewer to speak with us primarily about the challenges he and his leadership team face with regards to leadership issues in a large urban school system. Most of you probably know that LAUSD is second largest in the nation, second largest district. About what, 700 and some odd students, about 712,000 students? That's a lot, about 800 schools. So he's got his hands full. We've asked him not only to speak about what are those challenges, but how did he and his team identify that those would be the challenges that they would actually wrestle with over his term. He accepted a 4-year term. So for 4 years now, he's got an opportunity to reshape the culture in that system. We've asked him to share what will be his course of action in terms of wrestling with those challenges, who will co-lead this work with him, and what do they anticipate will be the outcomes as a result of their plan or course of action, all right? And hopefully there'll be time for you to ask him some additional questions that actually feed off of his conversation with us, or are in addition to. You may, this will be a way to feel the questions that you have most interest in. As much as you possibly can, think about some of the topics and themes and theories we've talked about in terms of leadership. You'll probably get a read on where you think his leadership style might be based on his conversation. All right? Some of you may know enough about him already to figure out what you think may be his leadership style. I don't know. But you may want to ask some questions that will help you to get more insight with regards to his leadership style. You might want to think about Bowman and Deal and the 4 frames. Think about in terms of what drives, what are his motivators in terms of reshaping the culture. How does he perceive the organization function? Where he sees the gaps. Remember, you've got, I think, each of you has the accountability class. So you may be thinking in terms of the gaps in terms of performance. What's going on in LAUSD that he thinks he needs to wrestle with? So frame your questions in some way that helps him to get at that. All right? So, I don't know that Darnice wants to do more than just begin by telling you what she knows about the district and some of the initiatives, and then you ask her some questions. The other 3 have agreed to chime in as well, so Darnice?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Darnice Williams, and I'm currently an assistant principal in LA Unified School District. How many LA Unified School District colleagues do we have? Informer, good. Just basically what I'd like to start with is just telling you a little bit about myself and my experience in LA Unified. I started my career as an English language arts teacher in a comprehensive multi-track high school. Moved from there to a teacher coach specialist in its central office. From there to a secondary literacy coordinator, central office. From there to another secondary literacy coordinator position in a different local district. From there to a middle school assistant principal. From there to a coordinator for program improvement unit, again, central district. And then where I am now as an assistant principal for LA Unified School District, a very large, comprehensive, local urban high school. And the reason that I give you that background is because most of my leadership experience and knowledge of the district has come through those multiple experiences. In terms of LA Unified, as you know, it's the 2nd largest district in the nation. over 700,000 kids, and wow, that's a mega district. And so when you think in terms of Bowman and Deal, you think of the 4 frames of leadership, political, symbolic, the human resource positions. You think about a person or an individual who assumes the responsibility of leader would have to be very strategic and savvy in terms of being able to negotiate in and out of those 4 frames. Sometimes we think, am I a symbolic leader? Am I a political leader? And once you start to interact with certain colleagues, certain subordinates, you realize that you become a combination leader. And so what I'm most interested in knowing that, and knowing the many initiatives in terms of professional development, in terms of improving instruction, literacy instruction and mathematics instruction on a secondary level for high school students, just wondering in terms of the superintendent's thinking in terms of, as Dr. Reed has mentioned, his course of action. Who are going to be the individuals to lead that charge? How are they going to be selected? How are they going to be supported? And how will their work be monitored? And that's the biggest piece. How do we monitor our efforts to ensure that what we do truly impacts student achievement on a comprehensive level? And so, any other questions? Any questions? And I want to hear some of your thinking.
What do you see as the most exciting innovation that is occurring in LA now that's going to impact high school?
Exciting innovation occurring now from my perspective, where I sit as the assistant principal, is actually the opportunity of the innovation division, where schools are now being invited to come in and think about creative ways to address student achievement and increasing student achievement. And I think that speaks to the need of trying something different without actually breaking away or breaking apart from the organization. Because in my opinion, it's my opinion, there are some benefits of being a part of a large organization, as well as there are some challenges, but I do believe from my experience only that the benefits outweigh the challenges. For example, in terms of the resources in professional development, on a personal level, I've received so much support in terms of professional development and growing as a leader through LA Unified. Certifications, opportunities to travel and to benchmark practices in other states, in other cities in terms of what is really working well in high school in multiple content areas. Those are opportunities that are priceless, and those are sometimes opportunities not offered in other areas. Any other questions? John?
So tell us about some of the other innovations that are going on at your large comprehensive high school that you think have promise for improving student achievement.
And some of the promising practices that we're engaged in, the small learning communities. Many of you are aware of the small learning community form or frame, where you try to create a smaller campus for students in a large context. We have about 3,800 students, and so 3,800 students, that's a city of its own, right? And so the idea with small learning communities is to try to provide a more personalized experience for the students in terms of the instructional delivery, in terms of parental involvement, where the students do not become lost in the big parade of students, that they do have a connection with their teachers, they do have a connection with administrators. We have, to mention, about 7 administrators, including our principal. And so that's a pretty large administrative team. And then we have about 160 teachers, again, pretty large staff. And so sometimes the student can feel overwhelmed. So with the small learning community model, the students have an opportunity to build those relationships with people who they see day to day in various content areas, and they know their support groups in terms of their counselors, in terms of their psychiatric social worker, in terms of their nurse, the deans, all of those resources, human resources, which students need to have access to in order to better prepare them for their educational tenure. John?
Actually, I'm a community-based educator, so I come from the nonprofit sector. And one reason I'm in the program is I'm curious about the community linkages that could be made between schools and community-based organizations. In your experience, have community-based organizations been utilized to kind of help with student achievement or fill performance gaps? If so, what did that look like?
My current location, we do have a partnership with USC.
Okay.
We are a part of the USC Partnership of Families, or School of Families. And so what that means is, for instance, some of our students, they come to USC and they take their math course here. And so every morning, instead of taking it at our school, they come here with a teacher, and they're put in the context of a college setting. And it's the NIA program where students are prepared for college. And then there are some benefits in that. Students successfully complete that particular program, they're guaranteed almost scholarship opportunities.
Okay.
And so we do have a large partnership base with several organizations, including USC.
Denise, this is for you and the other two people who work for LAUSD. What as to what each of you envision as the greatest challenge LAUSD faces?
Well, right now, the biggest challenge is payroll.
Yeah.
Basic pay, I mean, no, seriously, just the basic payroll question. A year ago, everybody knew that you get your check and it was right and it was wrong, it would get fixed really, really quickly. And right now, BTS is a huge problem that is causing a lot of teachers to feel, it's not encouraging them to work. It's a huge problem.
Wasn't going to explain that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Explain that.
BTS is, the district in January went through, purchased a new system to do payroll. And it's called
Electronic.
Business Tools, BTS, Business Tools for Services or something. And our superintendent changed the name to BS, but anyways. He made a joke, he said he took the T out of BTS. So it's been a problem. So then what's happened is that teachers either have been underpaid or overpaid. And right now what the district is trying to do is recoup almost $60–70 million or $70 million that they overpaid. One teacher got overpaid like $10,000. One person I heard, not if it's a woman, but I heard they got overpaid $90,000.
Wow.
And the person left the country, so they're trying to get that money back. And the big deadline, right now is that if they got overpaid and you don't pay it back by the end of this year, you're gonna get taxed on it. So the district is making this big push to try to get people to pay back the money that they were overpaid. And some people are saying, well, I was overpaid, I need the money, I don't have it. So you have to take out loans or something. It's a problem.
Well, that becomes an ethical decision if they knew they got overpaid and they didn't say anything in the get-go. It seems kind of unethical to me.
No, you're right.
Unless they're like me and you don't follow our policy.
You know when there's a great disparity.
If it was big, yeah.
I was going to say that the biggest problem that I see is the size of the district, and that's only one of the many examples. Because of the size of the district, small problems become very large problems. And things that, in smaller districts only have to go through 2 tiers, have to go through 8 tiers. And it's really complicated to get things done sometimes. So even though there's opportunities because of all the layers of structure, so if I have a good idea, how many people does it have to go through to get somewhere where someone's going to implement a policy that supports that good idea? And so I see the size overall being an issue, and that being one of those examples. So we all know what the problem is. The problem has been in place since since the system came into play in January, and here we are in November, almost a full year later, and what the things that have happened because they were not prepared to deal with the problem, and they cannot deal with a number of people. The people that were servicing us to address our issues regarding our sustainability, our livelihood, were temps, and they're gone. And so, and none of them actually know anything, nor are they empowered to do anything. And so just the sheer size makes things that should be smaller problems much larger.
And before we take the next question, I'm going to ask that we think in terms of how we can best capitalize on the focus with regards to the leadership challenges. Remember, we've already sent him a way to begin to frame his conversation. And issues like the payroll are large and heavy, most particularly on the minds of those of you who work in the district. But I'm going to ask that you save those kinds of questions so that he doesn't get the sense as if we're here to beat him up. That's not what it's all about. All right? And I really don't mean to downplay the importance of them, so please don't mistake. Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I don't know that much about Los Angeles since I don't come around here basically, but I do have a question about, and this happens in other districts, is do you have high-performing high schools in the same district as low-performing high schools, and is there a tendency for the upper level management, whatever you want to call it, to look at the higher performing and say, do what they do, because that works? Or is there, no, you're dealing with certain things in your high school that are unique to your high school, and so hence what you're doing may not work here, or vice versa? Or is there a push to like look at the, you know, the model and say, do this? That would be a question.
You have a loaded question, very good question. And just to start off with, in terms of high performing, yes, you do have some districts and they have high performing and mid performing and low performing, so you get the range. And you have other school districts in terms of levels, secondary, elementary. It's very different. You may have elementary schools who are high performing, and then there's a bit of a challenge in terms of the secondary models. And yes, sometimes you do look at some of the models in terms of match for match and say, again, we can benchmark and we can see those practices that are transportable. And we are advised to use those in terms of best practices.
I was going to say, as an LA Unified teacher, and I kind of needed to think about this, there are two areas that I'm most concerned with. I'm currently at a high-performing school in local District 4, predominantly Korean population, and we get zero funding because we're not Title I, and we're fighting for every last dollar for gate money, and that's the money that we're using for as many things as we can. In my opinion, I feel like we're over-identifying children for gifted programs who don't qualify, but I understand that, you know, this is the only funding our school is getting, and it's a real challenge because the only reason we have computers at my school site is because of our booster club. And in order for us to have technicians who can come in and work on the computers, and in order for us to have computers and a photocopier, it's because our booster club raises $120,000 a year. And our booster club is, I mean, bothering parents on almost a daily basis, making phone calls, we need money, we need money. And I don't like the way we have to harass our parent population, who are very generous as it is. The fact that we're even able to raise $50,000 is astounding to me. And I think it's only because of the area in which we live. You know, when we have our big book fairs and we have our carnival day, the community comes in because of where our school's located. But it's really frustrating to me as a teacher that I feel like the district says that schools that do well or students who do well do not deserve equitable funding when it comes to low-performing students. Gifted students need to be challenged. They need to be pushed. And from what I've read and from what I can gather, these are kids who, if they're not pushed and challenged now, they get into middle school and high school and they give up. They become behavior problems. They quit. And I don't want that to happen to my gifted students, my students who do need that additional support. And so as a teacher, that's something that's really concerning me. And then we have programs like Into English that I'm being told I have to teach my ELLs, but these children are gifted, and what they need is for me to push the gifted education. And the language comes, and my students are all ELD 5 for the most part when they leave me, or they've tested out. So I'm just struggling with that tension, with gate funding and our school having enough money, and just because they're doing well doesn't mean they don't deserve additional supports and resources. So that's something that concerns me in the district, to answer your question.
I mean, that's a huge issue. The district lost 2 of its best performing high schools who went charter, independent charter, because they were frustrated with that exact same thing. So I mean, that's a huge issue for schools that are high performing. They feel like they're being held back by the district, and therefore that the only way that they can do it is by actually leaving the district.
What factors are you facing personally as a leader at your urban school in charge in meeting the needs you closely achieving gap that you see personally?
In terms of challenges, I'm over special ed, budgets, English language arts, curriculum and instruction. And within that context, the biggest challenge is providing a context for students to learn in a differentiated arena. And when I use the term differentiated, I'm looking at the multiple subgroups. We're primarily African American and Latino. And what's unique about my particular site is that it's going through a population change. Once a predominantly African American school is now becoming predominantly Latino. And so with that population change, there's always a struggle in terms of 2 cultures trying to find their way and trying to establish themselves. And so sometimes it creates external as well as internal conflicts. When you talk about the need for culturally responsive instruction, you look at our special education population. When I look at our test scores in terms of our targets for English language arts and mathematics, and I look at the performance of our special education students, it's at a 5.3. And we know that that's nowhere near where it needs to be in terms of the state target. So that's a challenge in order to provide strategic instruction for those students. In terms of looking at a curriculum that is going to meet the needs of students from different cultural perspectives, as well as provide them with the wider community perspective, becomes a challenge. Because you get into, as you get into your economics class, you're starting to talk about different problems and challenges in terms of adverse selection, divergent agendas, or what have you. And so you have folks who believe in a culturally responsive instructional curriculum. And you have those who, for whatever reason, are not really aligned with that effort.
In terms specifically for your English language arts curriculum for your special needs students, what are you using?
In terms of, it depends. We have, our resource students who are in the general education classes, so they get either part of the developing readers and writers curriculum. We also have what is called talent development, which is a strategic reading program, and it's an intervention. And so we're on the 4x4 schedule. And what the 4x4 scheduling allows the school to do is the kids take 4 classes each semester. So in a year they have 4 semesters. And so they're able to take more classes. And so we do pre-intervention courses. And so those kids who are in resource, they get the pre-intervention course before they get the core curriculum. Now, the kids who are in the SEC, special day class, they receive multiple curriculum. It all depends, but primarily they do have access to the core curriculum when it's appropriate. Also, they have we have different intervention programs for them. But it's basically sometimes it's customized, again, according to their IEP and according to their needs.
Is there any data analyzing the impact of that 4x4 scheduling on student achievement?
Yes, there's lots of data out there. Actually, before we implemented 4x4, this is our first year, and I keep using the term benchmark because that is what we learned in our accountability class, and fortunately my principal is also in the program. And so we were able to go to North Carolina and to observe a couple of schools in terms of their implementation. And before we attended the schools, we did go over some research, and we had our teachers actually visit schools here in terms of their implementation. We saw really good schools who were in maybe 3 or 4 years of implementation, and we saw startup schools as well.
When I'm asking for the actual test scores, because the question that the concern that's come up in these 2 sites that I've worked at, now 3, that have one had it, one transitioned into it, there's a lot of concern with students, teachers, parents actually. And the concern being that, let's say how that schedule works, they have English in fall of 1 year, and they don't see that class again until the fall of the following year. And the impact that has on their retention of the knowledge, on the test scores of the school, that's why I'm asking, is there data being how it has impacted the test scores, because that's a concern. So if they haven't seen math since June of the previous year, and they barely started in January, let's say, and they're tested in that spring, are they really prepared to test?
Well, our kids take math every semester. And so that's when I talked about the pre-courses. And so they do have their math course. They have a pre-course, a preload course, and they also get the core. So they're taking math every semester. So I don't know how the schools just come from structured their 4x4 implementation, but it's different. You also have to consider the different variables in terms of implementation, because implementation at one site may be different based on the needs than at another site.
But is there a model that everyone's modeling it after? Did someone look at this and say, at this school we implemented it this way and this is how it affected test scores? What is it, what
And I can get you that documentation.
Okay, because that's what we have parents asking. And
That's a good question.
Sorry. Were you asking a question?
Yeah, but you can go first.
No,
I
ladies
like
first.
it.
Okay, all right.
that's the only reason.
Have you seen significant improvement in your school based on the Williams bill?
significant improvement.
And based on resources and structure and textbooks, and has that come to full tuition at your school site, having enough resources for all your students?
We have enough resources for all of our students, fortunately, in terms of textbooks, according to the Williams, in terms of cleanliness and safety or what have you. Sufficient evidence or sufficient data, that's a loaded question, and a question that if I had to document it to show you, no, we don't have that. But is it something that we are monitoring to establish a system to be able to go back and to chart and to monitor? Yes, we're in the process of working with our subcommittees to do that.
This is more of just a general question, not necessarily related to a student achievement, but what is on a daily basis your biggest challenge as an assistant principal in a large urban school district? School, actually.
Time.
No, really?
Time, yes.
Time to do everything?
Time, yes, to get everything done efficiently. Time to work with the students, to do your classroom observations, and also time to handle the unpredictable.
The variables.
Yes.
You've probably been through, I would imagine, at least three, maybe 4 or 5 superintendents in your time in LA Unified. How much difference do you think a superintendent makes in the district? How much impact can a superintendent actually have?
Shut the door.
From my point of view, I think the superintendent has a lot of impact, because the superintendent establishes the direction for the district or of the district. And in terms of working directly under 3 local superintendents, and then working also in support or a support unit for the superintendent, you see a lot of dynamics. But I think one challenging thing is that you have to really have a distributed leadership model in terms of when you have those top initiatives or the focus initiatives employed by the superintendent, that you have to have those leaders who are able to carry out and to take it down to the classroom. And sometimes I think that becomes a challenge depending on where you are in that stream or that transitional phase. But definitely the superintendent, in my opinion, from where I sit, from my experiences, has a great deal of impact, or the potential to have a great deal of impact.
I have a question about, this is called a KC. I'm from elementary, so I'm not really exposed to that, but how are you a KC person? I just had some, that I know that now that it's mandatory for high school graduation, and how are you trying to meet that goal that is out there for, the KC passing rate and things?
We're constantly providing our students with KC support classes, additional classes, in addition to their regular English language arts classes and their mathematics classes. And so we have KC boot camps where the students may receive additional intervention after school and also on the weekends.
Is the school itself providing that KC boot camp, or is the outside source kind of
School,
the schools?
the teachers, regular teachers.
I wanted to chime in on the high performing school piece about being in the same district, because I'm in a district where that does exist. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what high performing schools do that other schools do not. And there's an extensive body of research out there that will tell you that sometimes there's more teaching happening in the low performing schools, because what often gets left out of the picture is that you have a clientele with a different, not a better or less than, a different social capital. And so those kids, that population of children would do well in any school because they come equipped to school with that capital. As far as equity and funding, Title I money is distributed by levels of poverty. So I would just say that if you don't have that poverty in your school, you're not going to get that money. And that's not something that the district decides. That is something that the federal government decides. So I would say in those situations, because I hear your frustration, I'm part of categorical programs, so I hear it all the time from my high-performing schools. But those decisions are not made at that level. you have to have a percentage of poverty in your school to qualify for some, for most. For the bigger pot of money, you have to have a high percentage of poverty. My high-performing schools, most of them, they write grants, and yes, they have booster clubs, but they do seek other sources. But I hear that often, why can't we have Title I money?
Well, maybe I don't understand how the budget is broken down per school site, and it's just because it's, in a way, none of my business. I'm not sure how the principal.
It is your business, it's your tax dollars.
But I mean, I'm not sure how that gets allocated. But I mean, my school site is 65% Korean, and most of my students are born in Korea, and they come here, and sometimes they're only here for 2 or 3 years while their parents are working and they leave. We've got a highly transient population, but it's rooted in a very strong Korean community. So I mean, everybody is related and friends of the family, and they come together, and you know, the community itself is very, the thrust is on education. So I understand they're coming with a different social capital, but they're English language learners, and these are children, you know, who are performing, and I want to be able to, you know, give those children, you know, that gifted education, and I feel like I'm fighting for what little resources I have. We don't have paper sometimes, we don't have the things that I consider to be basic and essential, and I mean, even just computers at work and don't have Windows 98 that crash and nobody can fix them. And so it's just a concern at my particular site. But I understand the Title I money thing, but thank you for...
I just wanted you to know that because you were frustrated that it's not.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
No problem.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Well, our guest has arrived, and I want to just give a brief introduction, and then we'll invite him to sit with us and have a conversation. We shared just a little bit about your bio before you came in, but I want to just remind folks that, and I should say Superintendent Brewer is a former Navy Admiral.
Don't say that.
A 35-year veteran. And during his tenure in the Navy, he was actually able to begin a college program for well over 300,000 sailors to be able to take advanced courses so they could earn not only their bachelor's but also their AA degrees. He's actually leading a district of about 700,000 students, 800 schools, huge urban district. And we've invited him to talk to us tonight about some of the challenges that he and his leadership team have identified, what course of action they have decided to take, and actually how did they come up with this set of challenges out of all of the challenges that are out there. What would be the course of action, and what are the outcomes that they anticipate as a result? Then we'll open it up to questions from the group.
Okay.
And I'd like to welcome you all. So I'm Karen Gallagher.
Yes, we know.
I know.
We know.
And I'm going to actually be meeting with you tomorrow.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. I want to welcome Superintendent Brewer to USC and more specifically to our EDD program. This is a program that we're very proud of, and one of the things, this is one of the classes for the K-12 concentration, which is for individuals that are planning on a career, we think, in K-12 leadership.
Okay.
And I wanted you to know that we have 60, this is the cohort of 2010, pardon.
Okay.
2010, and they are in their second year.
First
Then I have
First year, first semester.
You're in the second.
We have two groups here.
Oh, that's what, okay. We have about 1 out of 4 of the students in our program are from LAUSD.
Okay.
So we want you to know that we see ourselves as providing some leadership pipelines for you through the EDD program. And they all have different career goals, but we think our EDD program is will be preparing them for those career paths. Now, you're going to give them a lot of information, but I have to give you something to thank you for coming, and this is sort of to brand you that you're here at USC. And you probably
there's a big game coming up.
Yes, well, that's you're going to love these gifts.
I haven't been on the Westwood recently.
Okay, well, good. Where will you go there?
Not this week.
Don't wear it over there this
Not
week.
this week.
We have a Beat UCLA.
I knew that was coming.
And we have a big bonfire tomorrow night, as a matter of fact, so there's that for
Okay.
you. And then we also have a hat.
I can't do that.
Besides being USC, it does say the Ross Area School of Education, so
Right.
you're double branded, so we want to
Thank
thank
you,
you so much.
thank you, thank you, thank you. I will put this in the appropriate place.
We'll root for Navy if you root for USC.
Okay. That's a good one. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I feel your pain. My wife has her EDD, and so I know what you all are getting ready to go through. You know, just watch out for that. Just in fact, she coaches doctoral students in making sure that they get through that process. So, good luck to you. Let me explain something. I spent over 35 years in the Navy, and so during that process, I dealt a lot in education and training. When I was Vice Chief of Naval Education and Training, as you heard, we started the Navy College program. But we train and educate just about every day in my business, so you know, fairly familiar with the pedagogy and the science of learning. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is, I did not seek this job. This job found me. There's an old adage: never respond to a cold phone call. And I responded to a cold phone call from someone who asked me would I consider putting my name in the hat for this job. So I threw my name in the hat because, you know, I have been dedicated to at-risk youth just about all my life. In fact, my parents and I started the David and Mildred Brewer Foundation in 1999 to help at-risk youth down in my hometown of Orlando, Florida. And so I'd already made the commitment that I was going to do something to help at-risk youth in the second half of my life. There's a good book by Bob Ufer called Halftime, which basically talks about the first part of your life, you learn and you earn, and in the second half of your life, you serve. And so that's why I'm here. So why take on LAUSD? 700,000 students, 76.6% at or below the federal poverty line, the largest gang population in the nation, the largest foster care population in the nation, the largest homeless population in the nation, the largest English language learner population in the nation, over 250,000 students, of which if we were to carve that out and create your own separate district, it would be the 6th largest school district in the nation. A large, what we call standard English learner population, that's those young people who are native English speakers but don't speak an academic version of English. They speak a non-standard version of English. I'm quite sure you all heard about the Ebonics challenge that was going on. So why do this? And how do you do this? And I won't even get into the fact that this is probably the most political city in the world. Because it's one of the things I found out very quickly is that politics in LA is a contact sport. So why do this? And how do you do this? Well, the first thing you do when you step into something like that, my predecessor, Roy Romer, who's the former governor of Colorado, basically came in and really did a wonderful job working with the elementary schools and building schools. We have the largest school building program in the history of the nation, $20 billion. So we're building 145 schools, and we're about 67 schools into that process, and we have obviously another 78 to go. And so so he did a great job. So that was sort of the foundation that I inherited. But where we were really hurting badly is in secondary. And that's in the middle schools and high schools. And that's not just here, that's nationwide. Elementary schools tend to be a lot easier. Obviously the children are a lot younger, easier to manage in many ways. But once they hit that middle school level, where they start to encounter that thing we call hormones, and trying to figure out whether they're children or adults in that tough zone. And so I immediately said, I've got to focus in the middle, because as I looked at the data, I began to understand that, that's where we were beginning to lose them. We were losing them to a lot of things. We were losing them to the streets, we were losing them academically, etc. And so that's where we began to focus. Now, so how do you take a major organization with all these challenges and begin to start working with it? Well, the first thing I figured out very quickly is that we did not have any guiding principles or strategies. There's a book by Sun Tzu called The Art of War, which is probably the oldest strategy book in the history of the world. It's thousands of years old. And one of the things you begin to understand is you have to have guiding principles. You have to have something that kind of guides you. And so we came up with 5 guiding principles. And the first thing I went after was the politics and emotion in this district. And then, you know, that's an ongoing battle, as you can imagine. So the first guiding principle is that we're going to be research and data driven. We're going to let the facts drive us towards decisions and help us in terms of developing our policies. The second guiding principle was that in order to have a world-class education system, you have to have a world-class workforce. So you have to develop the workforce in terms of their own personal and professional development. So you have to have a workforce that you're constantly educating, because in the 21st century, as you can imagine, the knowledge cycle is fairly rapid. In other words, you know, if you look at that camera right now, I bought a camera 10 years ago. It was analog, that's digital, and it's probably going to go to something else here pretty soon. If you look back at this, the reason the encyclopedia business now is now on disc rather than in books is because if you buy a set of encyclopedias today, it's probably 5 years from now, the information is probably going to be somewhat obsolete. So you have to have a world-class workforce to deal with that. So you have to be in what I consider to be a continuous learning cycle. Now, the third guiding principle is because we are in every 500 years, there's this leap in human development. 500 years ago, what was it? You were doctoral students, what was it 500 years ago? In human development. It was, yeah, it was somewhat of a renaissance, but it was a thing.
Printing press.
Printing press, Gutenberg. So 500 years hence, what was it? The internet. Knowledge. We call it the inverse knowledge effect. So with that in mind, you have to be continuously in an innovation cycle. So you have to be innovative. And so the third guiding principle is that we're going to be innovative. All great organizations have innovation divisions or departments, what we call R&D, research and development. And so in order to keep up with everything else I just said, you have to have something that's innovative, that's going on, that's driving you, that's helping you to keep pace with this knowledge proliferation, with this technology cycle development. And so you have to have that. And so we created the third guiding principle around innovation. The fourth guiding principle is this. In an urban school environment, especially in an urban school environment, that education is the responsibility of everybody in that city, county, whatever. So everybody has a stake in the education of children in this environment. Why? Why is that? Why would I say that? What is going on in an urban child's, especially at-risk child's life that's so different from, say, a suburban child? What's different? What do y'all think is different? Y'all know I was going to ask all the questions. What's different?
The neighborhoods.
The neighborhoods, what else?
Crime.
Crime, what else?
Family.
Okay, family, okay, all right. So we said that in order to create a world-class urban education system, I have to have a laser-like focus on parents and community. Because parents are critical to the education of children. Now, let's talk about the parents in an urban environment. Who are they?
Working class.
Working class, immigrants in many cases, non-high school graduates. The lowest performing high school in LA Unified has 73% of the parents are non-high school graduates. Okay? All right. So when we say community, what do we mean? We mean, and we're working with Jacqueline McCroskey from USC on wraparound services around our schools to find out where all of the social services are, where all of the safety services are, and all of the charities, etc., around our schools and families of schools. Why? Because we have to be able to give these young people the same opportunities and the same support systems that a, say, middle-class suburban child has. Okay? So that's why we created guiding principle number 4 around parents and community. And we use an airline analogy. And that old airline analogy says this, that since a parent is so critical to the education of a child, if you were on an airplane and you lose oxygen pressure and that oxygen mask comes down, the flight attendant says you put that oxygen mask on whom first?
Yourself.
Yourself. Okay, and then if you're sitting next to your child, then your child. So the philosophy or the analogy is very clear. Empower yourself, empower your child. So what most people don't know about LA Unified School District is that we educate more adults than anybody else either. We educate 400,000 adults every year. Okay, 400,000. So we educate about 1.1 million people every year. And so the fifth guiding principle, it goes back to Abraham Maslow. And that is the basic needs or the hierarchy of needs of human beings, and it goes back to the basic needs of human beings. That's food, shelter, and security. Roma covered shelter. I'm taking on food, because food service was not good. And oh, by the way, since I'm at USC, I can make this announcement. We just hired the executive chef from USC. Yes. So sad. So I don't know how your food program is going to go after that. Ours is going to improve. Right, we did. And so to improve food quality, okay? But the other piece is security, safety. We did a survey of 6th graders in 2003. 64% had experienced violence, 65% had seen violence, and 27% was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which is one of the most debilitating disorders that you can have psychiatrically. Okay, my uncle had it from World War II after the invasion of Normandy, and he was in that state from 1944-45 until 1963. He had to literally live in a hospital. So if you have that kind of trauma, you have to have a guiding principle that says safety is going to be a major priority. So that's what we have done in terms of trying to capture exactly how we're going to change LAUSD and make it a world-class education system. Now, obviously the challenges are many. The challenges, obviously, we have, in any change environment, for those of you all who read Professor Carter out of Harvard on leading change, you know that there are basically 8 things you have to do. You have to create a sense of urgency, you have to build teams, etc. So my first year I've been really doing a lot of listening and assessing, as well as creating I created around guiding principle number 2, which is the employee development piece, what we call professional development, is that we created an office called at least a position called the Deputy for Professional Learning, Development, and Leadership. And so what we're going to do now is take all of our faculty members, all of our teachers, and the day you walk into the LAUSD, you're going to get a leadership course. And then from there on out, you're going to continue to get trained. Okay, and so we're going to create pathways for teachers who don't want to be administrators, because some teachers don't want to go into to become principals, etc. So they want to be master teachers. Well, you got to create a pathway for that to happen. So we're getting ready to create an incentive program for a lot of our teachers to get their doctorates. So we may help your program out over here a little bit. So that's one piece. The other piece is to create an office that deals with parents and civic engagement. And so we have created that office of parent and civic engagement. So in an urban environment, from my perspective, is that you have to have a holistic approach to educating the children. Because these children, if you sit down and I talk to them quite often, if you ever sit down and talk to them about their lives, they're going to sit down and tell you things like what the kids at Santee High School told me when I first went over there. And they said, Mr. Superintendent, could you keep the school open at 9 o'clock tonight? I said, why? This is because, number one, I don't have a computer at home, I don't have any resources at home, and I like to stay here and work on AP courses. I said, okay. And he says, what's the other reason? He says, because I'm afraid to walk home through the gang gauntlets. I actually have to walk through gang gauntlets. One sheriff deputy showed me how, over by Washington Prep, how the kids had to zigzag to go home. They had to continuously avoid certain areas just to go home, and how that was impacting their ability to learn. And so we're dealing in a totally different world when it comes to it. Now, so how do you get through this? How do you get the board, the community, and everybody to go along? As you know, the board can be somewhat of a challenge at times, as everybody has probably seen. But believe it or not, you know, the board gets it. In most of the cases, they get it. So part of my thing is to get my board to go along with the whole process. They have bought into the guiding principles. They understand that. And so obviously we aren't going to agree on everything, but that's just the way life is. The other piece is to get the community partners to come in and help us. So one of the things we've done is we have created something called Innovation Division within the context of guiding principle number 3. Innovation Division is designed to get network partners to come in and work with our schools. For example, Urban League, Bradley Foundation, USC, are all lined up right now to work with a family of schools. Because you have to work in context of a family of schools, because children go from pre-K, to kindergarten, to 5th grade, to middle school, to high school. And what we have found is that within the breaks between 5th and 6th and 8th and 9, we're beginning to see that some 5th graders, a lot of 5th graders are not quite ready for 6th grade. And a heck of a lot of 8th graders are not ready for 9th grade. And so that's been one of my biggest challenges. And it's all centered, a lot of it is centered around English language learners. That is a very, very, very difficult population to educate. Why? Because you're not only transitioning them from their native language to English, but you have to transition them in a way within the context of Bloom's taxonomy where they can evaluate and analyze and comprehend. So the word party is a classic example. The young people can express the word party, but what does party mean? What are all of the connotations? Party to a young 4th and 5th grader means I'm going to get me some balloons and etc. But then you say, well, wait a minute, you're at a party of 3 at the restaurant, or you are a member of the Democratic or Republican Party. So within the context of connotation, we are beginning to understand that we've got to do a better job in making sure that they have captured the language in an academic way. And so that's our biggest challenge right now, is that group, that English language learner group, as well as our standard English learners who are largely African American and some Latinos. And the African Americans in our school district are the lowest performing students. So that clearly remains a challenge. So one of the things I did, and it's going to be here, near here at USC, is I called for a national summit on language acquisition. And that's going to be the 13th and 14th of December. And we're going to focus on English language learners and standard English learners in their ability to acquire language skills. Because literacy equals numeracy equals everything else. That is the key to knowledge, literacy. Without literacy, you can't access knowledge. So that's a major focus. And what we have found out, especially with our standard English learners, is that it is almost second language acquisition for them. And so we have a tendency to denigrate students who don't speak what we call, quote, proper English, rather than treating them as, okay, you learned your English in the home environment, in the neighborhood, but when you walk into this classroom, we're going to speak another form of English. It's going to be a different type of English. There is no reflection on your intelligence just because you may split a verb over here. I mean, how many athletes really split verbs? A lot. Okay? You know, but they are dumb. It's not a reflection on their intelligence. It's just that they have not acquired academic English in that way. And so the bottom line is that we have to change that mindset. So that is a major summit that we're going to have. Okay, so who is going to lead all of this? Because in leadership, you've got to have a team. Okay? You really got to have a team. So we created these 2 positions, and we're getting ready to launch what we call a high priority schools initiative, of which Dean Gallagher is a part of the task force. And one of the things we found out very quickly is that we're going to need someone that we're going to have to hire here very shortly, who is going to kind of lead what we call the school performance piece. In other words, we have had schools languishing in this what we call underperforming level for 8, 9, 10 years. 34 of them have been like that. 309 of our schools are what we call program improvement schools under No Child Left Behind. And what does that mean? Is that they're not meeting all of the what we call adequate yearly progress for all of the subgroups. Whether you're talking about English language learners, whether you're talking about African Americans, Latino, but especially in one of our most challenged groups is students with disabilities. That is our most challenged group. And so we're going to have to focus within the context of our high priority schools initiative and our new leadership team. We've got to bring in additional leaders to deal with this. So my hiring it took me a little while to get this, because I had to really live in guiding principle number one. I clearly began to understand that the people that I have to bring into this district have to be experts in English language acquisition in terms of English language learners. They have to be experts in urban education. That's not as hard to find as the ELL experts, because as we found out, we are actually above the state average in reclassifying students from what we call fluent English proficiency, about 13% per year. Yet, the state of California, frankly speaking, is only reclassified, as well as we are, 50% of those students. And if only 50% of that large population of students are reaching English proficiency, we aren't going to get there. We will never get there. So the team that's going to have to help me lead this has to be proficient in those areas. So we're going to focus like a laser on that. And then within the context of the holistic approach to children, that's when we think that we will be able to make a move. Now, how long is that going to take? Probably, how many of y'all have read Good to Great? Okay. The flywheel effect normally takes anywhere from 5 to 8 years. 5 to 8 years. Okay. So 4 or 5 years from now is when we think we will begin to see the impact of everything that we're doing. Because that's how long it's probably going to take. Because the bottom line is you can't just open up kids' brains and pour knowledge in. Okay? This is not mechanical. Okay? So we're going to have to really work hard at that. And so these are some of sort of the challenges that I confronted, other than BTS, which is the Business Tools for Schools payroll system. And since we're on camera, I'll just say it this way. I wanted to take the T out of BTS because of the way it was introduced. By the way, I did not. And that's another challenge. Everybody feels that, okay, well, you're focused like a laser over here on the curriculum and instruction, but what people don't realize is this is a major business. This is a $7 billion business. Yeah, that's how much my budget is every year, $7 billion a year. And so you can imagine, if you have a payroll problem, how much energy and time that's going to consume. That consumes a lot of our time trying to solve that. Now, obviously, I didn't buy this system. I inherited it, and which means that it took me a while to figure out what was going on, but it was clear that there were some issues in terms of the way we managed that contract. And so, luckily, I had some experience in that in my prior life. And so what we have had to do in that regard is bring in some of the world's best contractors on top of the contracts that we already have and help to fix that particular problem. And it is a very complex problem, because one of the other things, I talked about LA having a politics that was a contact sport. They also have a payroll system that is the most complicated in the entire country. It's a very complicated payroll system, and so we had to solve that problem. Okay, let me open this thing up. Questions? Yes?
So, we talk a lot about challenges. I'm curious, what are you optimistic about?
Optimistic. I'm optimistic that, here's where my optimism has started, and I'm going to be very frank. When I got here, this was a very fractured community. We were involved in the 1381 legislation and litigation between the board and the mayor. And once we got past that, we began to, I felt that my job was to start to sort of heal the wounds. Because I knew, based on guiding principle number 4, that we were not going to educate the children in this city if we had a split community, and we were fractured, and we divided along political fault lines. And so my optimism is the fact that since then I have been able to forge a lot of partnerships and relationships that heretofore had not been formed. In fact, the mayor is going to come in through Innovation Division and partner with some of the schools, some of the families of schools. So my optimism is that we will be able to continue to forge the partnerships that we need in order to make sure that we, in essence, start to educate these children in a holistic way. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we have some great teachers out here. And to the extent that I can get to them and get them the professional development that they need, I think we will inspire a different level of instruction here at LAUSD. Yes?
I'm actually not from the K-12 environment. I'm from the guiding principle number 4, parents and community.
Okay.
And I'm curious, for those of us who work with community-based organizations, what approach do we need to take to go into a school like Santee High School and approach them with the services that we have and the infrastructure that's already kind of itself fractured as a school community?
Mm-hmm.
What are your suggestions for approaching that?
Well, one of the things we're going to do there, and that's a good question because, in fact, Dr. McCroskey is helping us work our way through that. Here's what happens. Schools have their own culture. And so what you as a community-based organization have to do is you can't come in and say, and come in as I call it, in John Wayne, and come, you know, we're just going to come in here and we're going to Bogart our way in. That's Humphrey Bogart. And so, you can tell how old I am. And so you can't force your way in. You have to come in from a supporting, with a supporting attitude. And so the first thing you do is you ask the question, where do you need help? Okay, and if you are the right fit for that, fine. If you're not, acknowledge that and move out. Or help them find what they really need. And so that's the approach that we're using. We're going to do sort of an assessment of every school's need. You know, for example, a Santee versus a Crenshaw is going to be different. Different populations. One is very high in terms of foster care kids. One is high in ELs. Santee is the school, obviously, with the big gang population over there. So they need some safety and some other help over there, as opposed to, say, Crenshaw, which has a large, like I say, has a large foster care. So you have to kind of find your match. And what you're going to find is that, and some of this is going to be cultural, too. You know, some of the counselors, and I have to defer to some of my principals here, that, you know, principals, you know, have a lot of people trying to lay stuff on them. Some schools, frankly speaking, have more than they can handle. And so that's why you have to go in and find out where they are first, and then find out if you fit. One high school has 50 people and organizations working with them. They are overwhelmed. They're just totally overwhelmed. And they could not take not one other community-based initiative, no how, no way. And so you have to go in and work with them. But if you, in our case, the best thing, one of the reasons we're creating this office of civic and parent engagement is to start this clearinghouse. So that community-based organizations can come in and say, this is what we have to offer, and then we can help match what you have to offer to the right schools. Yes?
Hi, my name's Emily. I'm actually in the higher education specialty in the EDD program.
Okay.
I'm curious, there's an increasing trend in higher education that parents are helicopter parents, or they're highly involved in their students' lives, which is actually accentuated by increasing technology in schools, you know, like cell phones or text messaging, or they'll call the parent right after the test and tell them how they did or what have you. Do you feel like that's something that is also a trend in LAUSD, and how does that impact your job or your day-to-day or the jobs of the people in your environment?
In some ways it does. I mean, LAUSD, as a lot of people probably don't realize, is that has some of the best schools, and obviously we have, I'm going to be very frank with you, we have the best students in the nation. We've won the National Academic Decathlon 4 out of the last 5 years, 10 out of the last 19. So we have the best students in the nation. And I mean, we're beating Texas and several other major states. Within that context, that tends to be where your helicopter parents are. Okay, with what we call low maintenance students, high maintenance parents. So I mean, and so the my principals can probably answer this better than I can. What has to happen is that basically you respond to them as best you can, and it's interesting because those parents tend to be a little bit more litigious as well, and so we find that most of our lawsuits in special education are in the high-performing school districts. Okay, and so it's a tough problem in trying to manage that. But they have every right to do what they do. But with technology being what it is, my wife teaches in a high maintenance, low maintenance environment. And what she does is that she, as a teacher, she's very proactive in the way she deals with parents. And so what she will do, first of all, email. Second of all, emails are answered within 24 hours. Third, all news is not bad news. So you make sure that you get good news to those parents as well as bad news. And then you have to be, obviously have to be responsive, and you have to bring in for parent conference, parent-teacher conferences. It depends on how the school leadership deals with it. Sometimes you just can't resolve. You can't resolve. You just can't resolve. But, most of the time, it's a matter of being actively engaged, and for the teachers themselves to be just as proactive in terms of technology as the parents. Hope that answers that. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, have your leadership styles changed? Has your leadership style changed? I mean, 35 years in the Navy is a long time. I spent 7 years in the Navy. I thought that was. I was wondering if your leadership style has changed since you've gotten out.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. You have to be a lot more collaborative in this job. I think it's C cubed, it's not even C squared. You're obviously a lot more collaborative. But the good news for me, I had a good transition into this job. I guess if I had come out of a total military environment where I was just dealing with sailors, the transition would have been a little bit more difficult. But my last 6 years, I was dealing in commands that were mostly civilian. So I already started to adapt to a civilian environment, including unions. I had 5 unions in my last job. So I knew how to deal with unions. In fact, these union leaders called the other union leaders to find out what kind of a guy. And their best compliment, they say, "You are workable." That's kind of laugh. But anyway, yeah, you have to adapt to every culture is different, and so the only good news about the cultures I grew up in it because both my parents are teachers, my wife's a teacher, both in-laws are teachers, and 2 of my 3 sister-in-laws are teachers. So I think I know the culture pretty well. Yes.
My name's Gary Clark. I work in the undergrad admission office here at USC, and I'm curious about, we've talked a little bit about some of the partnerships you guys have with USC, but in general, what role do you think local universities, community colleges, state or private, can play in supporting LAUSD in their college going rates for their students? Is there more that we can and should be doing?
Well, at the community college level, we're looking for formal relationships with high schools. And to the extent possible, we want to have as many community college courses being taught at the high school level as possible. One of my goals is to get probably up to 10% of the high school graduates graduating with at least some community college courses, or as many as possible with an associate's degree. I just featured during my State of Schools address a young lady who grew up here in Watts who finished Harvard Teacher Prep, which is on Harvard Mill College in the Harvard area. And she graduated with a high school diploma and an associate's degree. And unfortunately, she's going to go to your rival, UCLA, and she's going to be a freshman in junior status. And so she'll finish her bachelor's degree in 2 years and her master's in 4 or less. And so that's those are the kinds of students we want to go after. We have about 300 students like that every year, about 300. That's what I've been told. I haven't verified that. Now, within that context, we also want to establish more formal relationships with the local colleges and universities, both, obviously USC, the UC system, as well as Cal State system. So, what does that mean? That means that we want these children to be exposed to youth in terms of coming on campus. That's on the low end. On the high end, we're looking at perhaps starting what we consider to be a USC Academy or UCLA Academy, where you have high school students going to an academy sponsored by you. Or we're looking for formal partnerships, network partnerships with a family of schools. And I think USC is clearly considering that. And then because you have a school of education, we want to be able to help you in terms of your development of teachers who are coming into urban education. And so there needs to be that articulation as well. And so to the extent that we are learning, as we learn, you learn about how to deal with these, especially special populations. So I haven't even talked to Dean Gallagher. I'm meeting with her tomorrow. But the bottom line is, you know, you've got to really, when you do the research and you do the analysis, you really have to understand that there are some real, because one good thing about NCLB, it focuses us on subgroups. There are some specialized subgroups that you really have to understand in order to educate. And English language learners, students with disabilities, African American students where we still have some expectation issues, dealing with bias and issues dealing with that. You really got to understand that. So academically, you have to understand that at the teacher education level, and at the practical level when you come out and do student teaching, etc. So we're also looking at creating demonstration schools associated with a college, and those demonstration schools will be schools where you can bring in the student teachers, etc., as well as teachers to kind of get yourself acclimated and start working your way into those programs. Yes.
LAUSD is a very complex organization with lines of authority, and one of the frustrations I've heard a lot of leaders at the site level is that it's hard to make substantial change at a site level in a system that's so large, and you hear the word bureaucracy come up a lot. What's your take on that, or how do you build capacity in site level leaders to be able to make a change within that large organization?
Well, and I agree with that. I found LAUSD to be extremely large and in many cases not as responsive as it should be. In fact, the facilities division basically divorced themselves away from a lot of our processes and created their own contracting and procurement division because of that. They were not able to pay their bills on time using our system, and so they basically created their own system, so now they pay their bills within 18.2 days. So one of the things I am looking at bringing, one of the good news things about my training is that in an organization like the Navy, we began to understand that we needed to become smart in terms of business processes and processes in general. And so, again, going back to my guiding principle number 2, which is basically employee development and leadership and management training, we are introducing executive leadership development training so that we can begin to educate our workforce on things like Lean Six Sigma, Balanced Scorecard, and all of those business processes that will help us in terms of developing a culture that can, because I can go in and dictate a lot of this, but within the context of change management, it won't happen until I educate them first. And so they have to have the knowledge and skills and ability and tools to use in order to change the system. So that's the only way I'm going to get the system to change. And so one of the things, and the other way you do this is money. I'm moving money out of central down to the sites. But just handing a site money still doesn't work unless they know what to do with it. Okay, so you have to, again, it goes back to this whole executive level leadership training that we're getting ready to embark on. In fact, I'm having a meeting with one of the major people that's going to help us here next month. And that is, I've got to get them to training in order to do that. I've got to get them the business tools. The Navy started this back in about 1999, 1998 time frame. We, as senior officers in the Navy, we all had to go to executive level leadership training. We went up to places like San Jose and went into Silicon Valley, met with chambers at Cisco and people at Novell, etc., and began to talk to the CEOs and executives to talk about how they were able to make themselves a lot more efficient. And so you will see over time with LAUSD, as long as I'm here, you're going to see us moving more and more towards a matrix organization. That means that what I found in program improvement, which is the NCLB piece, that all of the program improvement people were where do you think they were? And now here we are, we got all these program improvement schools, but where were they? They were in central headquarters. I said, that don't make any sense. I said, you got to be where the action is. Where are the schools? Why are you down? Why are you up here? So we immediately deployed them out to the local districts and said, you're going to go where the schools are. Now, you still, I don't know how many of y'all have read the book Roaring 2000s by Harry Dent. It's a good book because Harry Dent says now organizationally we're going to be circular. And within, you're gonna have, inside of that, you're gonna have a hub called the server, kind of computer term, and on the outside you have browsers. And so the server serves as sort of that core of expertise that you need to be able to feed to the people who are actually doing all the work out here on the browser side, on the outer circle, who are actually in the workplaces and in the sites doing the job. So they provide you with that expertise that you need. And oh, by the way, because it's circular, you don't have stovepipes. In other words, you don't have, people who are not talking to each other. So you have to communicate around that circle. And so what we're saying is we have 8 local district superintendents, okay? And so what we're saying to all 8 of those local district superintendents, you're on that circle. You and the schools are on that circle. And the headquarters people, which should get as small as we possibly can make it, are inside of that circle to provide you the support and expertise that you need in order for you to do your job out here. And oh, by the way, we can rotate you not only around that circle, but back into the middle of the circle, just in case we need to work with you a little bit more in terms of your expertise. And so that's where we're headed. And that was my first budget decision. I took $11 million and moved it out of Central out to the local district soups, and we'll eventually move more of that out. And I cut 500 jobs out of Central. Cut 500 positions. So just to make sure people knew I was serious. Yes.
Really glad to hear about the Department of Innovation.
Yeah, Innovation Division.
And because I'm involved at a charter school inside the district, and one of the reasons why we're so excited about what we do is because we're all about innovation and trying new things. What value do you see with charter schools inside of your district?
Functionally, we will be aligned with Charter Division in LAUSD will be aligned with Innovation Division. Because what we want to do is, in many ways, our Innovation Division schools will be charter-like. They will have network partners who are actually running the schools or working with the schools, that they will be reporting to me. But more importantly, we want to be able to make them as efficient as possible. That's where you're going to have more school site management, what we call school-based management, SBM. And so, but again, they've got to be well-trained. There's going to be some very strict accountabilities in there. And then what we're going to do is that because we are going to be kind of integrated between charter and innovation, we're going to study the best practices in charter schools, because you all are truly independent and incubators out there of innovative techniques and pedagogy, etc. So we're going to study you. And to the extent that you're doing things that are well documented using our guiding principle number 1 through research and data, then we will basically begin to integrate that into not only innovation schools, but also the traditional schools. And so we've already looked at, for example, one charter that we're watching very closely right now is Watts Learning Center. Okay, because Watts Learning Center has a largely African American, but I guess 100% African American population. And it's the small school, 143 students. And they have an academic performance index of about 822. Well, that's that's about as high as it gets for African Americans in this district. And so, with 800 being the target that the state wants us to have. And so I talked to them and said, how are you doing this? And of course, it's very rigorous in terms of academics. But again, it's a holistic approach. These children are traveling abroad. So, so they're going to Africa every year, they're going here every year, etc. So their whole horizons have been expanded. And so I said, well, wait a minute, are you cherry picking? He says, no. I said, what's your free and reduced lunch percentage? Okay, the district is 76%, he's 88%. So that way I knew by measuring what they're doing that in essence, they're somebody I have to study. Synergy is another one. KIP, we look at KIP as well. Which one are you?
I'm out in Lynn Hills. It's Ivy Academia.
Ivy, okay, yeah, Ivy, entrepreneur, yeah. So we'll study that.
Yeah.
We, as many of you know, I brought Green Dot into Locke High School. Okay, so Green Dot's into Locke High School. And the reason that Locke is in, there's a reason for that. We have 1,300 ninth graders. And how many 10th graders do you think we have? About 500. And a lot of those were 9Rs, which are retained. Now, as it turns out, we have more ninth graders than we do any other grade at secondary level, because the number of people we retain. And so we've got 68,000 ninth graders in the entire system and only 28,000 seniors, but we'll have 49,000 eighth graders. So as the eighth grade, 49,000 feed, a large percentage of them don't move on. And so we end up with this huge bulge at the ninth grade level. And if a child fails, what is the child going to do? They're going to drop out. They're going to leave the system. So when we looked at Animal Green Dot and looked at their ninth grade house academy slant model, we said, okay, fine, I want to put that in there, see if it works, as well as it worked outside when he was doing it outside of Jefferson and Jackie Robinson and all the rest of those places. And so we want to see if it works. It's got to be better than we're at. And so we did that. It was a very controversial decision, but the bottom line is it was something we felt we needed to do. But the whole key is we want to benchmark and replicate that. Okay. Yes?
My district is considering we have an 8th grade retention program right now, and they're considering changing it to a 9th grade retention program. Do you know why LAUSD has chosen to do it at the 9th grade level as opposed to 8th grade?
Well, you know, it was in the context of their social promotion policy. They felt that that was the best place to do it. But the other thing, too, is that's when you start earning credits. And so from that perspective, I think that that's why they did it. I wasn't here when they made this decision, but that's historically what I understand that was the reason. But the key for me is that we've got to get the 8th graders ready to go to 9th grade. We're finding that our 9th grade reading levels are around 6th grade. Again, it goes back to literacy. And so if they're not literate, and then all of a sudden you step into high school, then you're going to have a higher retention rate at the 9th grade, and that's one of the reasons we're having a higher retention rate in 9th grade. Now, so how do you mitigate that? Well, a lot of schools have created 9th grade academies, and where they put 9th graders through a very intensive academic regimen. But they also put them through what I consider to be a very strong counseling model. In other words, one of the best schools we have in terms of transitioning 9th graders to 10th and 10th to 11th. We really want to get them to 11th grade, because once we get them to 11th grade, then they will tend to graduate. So even if they make it to 10th grade, they're not out of the woods yet. So Polytech has created a 9th and 10th grade counseling center, what they call 9th and 10th grade counseling center. And what they do is the 9th grade counselors pick you up when you're an 8th grader and bring you into the 9th grade. They stick with you, they work with you, they know what your academic loads are, they know what your social problems are, they know what your personal problems are. And then they take you to, those same counselors work with you all the way to the 10th grade. Okay? And then they hand you off to the 11th grade, and then they loop back down and pick up the 8th graders coming out and bring them through. Some school systems are using something called, within the context of a small schools concept, or say a school of social justice. All of the 9th graders will go into this one school. And then, within a small schools concept, based on themes, whether it's music, performing arts, engineering, technology, whatever the case might be, then those 9th graders would then choose and go out into those 10th grade and hit all of the small schools in the 10th grade. That's one concept. In other words, it's sort of that orientation that they need, and that nurturing that they need, and the transition and orientation that they need in order to be successful high school students. So there's a lot going on in there in the 9th grade other than just academics. And so within that context, I think that a lot of our schools are going to move more and more towards that. Yes?
With students with disabilities in your district that, for one reason or another, are not going to pass California high school exit exam and receive an official diploma, get a certificate of completion, are you in the process of developing any vocational programs for students that are not going to achieve a high school diploma?
Well, okay, I'm just going to stay within the law here. There are exceptions. I think it was a Campbell decision. There are exceptions to students who can't pass and they're held harmless. Okay, so it depends on the severity of their disability. For those students who don't quite meet that metric, clearly career tech is something that we do. But we still push to get them through to pass the Casey. And the way we do that is we offer them post-high school graduation, we offer them Casey prep courses. We work with the community college on this. And oh, by the way, they can still go As long as they completed their credits, they can still go to a community college. And they can still go all the way and earn their AA degree. And so it's just a matter of making sure they understand all of that. But having a high school diploma is still important if they want to go to a four-year college. And so we continuously work through that process. In other words, if they don't meet the bar in terms of being special ed or students with disability, where they are exempt, then we just continue to work through. And right now, I think the pass rate for students with disabilities is probably in the 60th percentile. It is 66% for English language learners, those who do not reclassify. For those who reclassify as fluent English proficient among the English language learners, the district average for passing the case is around 87, 88%, somewhere between the two. Their pass rate is 92%. So once we get you to English proficiency, the English language learners actually pass at a higher rate than the overall population. So that's why it's so important. That's why the summit is so important. We really got to figure a way to get them to that point. Once we get you to English proficiency, then we have a much more successful student. Yes.
As future leaders in education, what do you think is the most important skill or, adaptive skill that we could have going into this situation?
That's a good question. When you say education, you mean urban education or just education?
Urban education is.
Okay. You really got to know the challenges of an urban child. I mean, you really got to understand that. Okay. And I think, and I'm just going to be very candid. Whatever, I grew up in a college graduate home. Was everybody in my family graduated in college, including my grandparents. And so you have to adapt and say, and be what I consider to be very compassionate and understanding of the challenges that an urban child is going through. And I think so part of it is your attitude, okay? And that's going to be the main thing. And then after that, it's just a matter of doing the homework and studying it and understanding all of the pedagogy and all of the instructional techniques that you're going to have to use in order to get these children up to speed. And that's not easy. And I just hope as an educational leader that you're not easily frustrated. Because if you're easily frustrated, don't come into this business because you won't make it. Okay? Because, I can tell you that from my experience so far. Yes.
I mean, how do you deal, though, with, you made a statement that you got criticized for often. I thought it was one of your best statements when you said how we just need to remove bad teachers. I don't think that's not exactly what you said, I'm paraphrasing, but how do you deal with the teachers and the site administrators who don't know the challenges of the urban child and don't care to know the challenges of the urban child?
I think one of the things you do, first of all, you work with them as best you can. See, you go back to Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, in the social sector piece, and he made it very clear. See, once you reach tenure, you can't get rid of folks. You just can't get rid of it. And the real challenge for me in terms of moving, say, teachers who are ineffective, is that even if you move them, you don't really move them. They call it the dance of the lemons. And so the other challenge is if you really want to go after them and get them removed legally, there's another step to this, and that's the administrative judge. So you have to default to my guiding principle number 2 and try to work as best as you can, and again, going back to Jim Collins, and put the right person in the right seat on the right bus, and try to find them a place in the system where they can be effective. And so my challenge with the unions and everybody else is to get to that point where I can at least move them to a certain point, but more importantly where I can, and that's why I'm really working hard to get this heavy professional development, what I consider to be a very intensive professional development program, and try to get them to a point where I can really work with them. Now the good news is the vast majority of the teachers clearly are good teachers. But you do have some that are not effective. My principals will tell you that point blank. I mean, they rail at me every time I talk to them about that. Some school districts have been able to work with their unions to be able to move teachers and move them out of the classroom. Some people just, they can be very effective outside of the classroom. So you may have to find some positions for them outside of the classroom. But you can't just throw them out because you're a public agency, and they're protected from that. Yes.
I'm going back to the ROP programs and things like that. You're referring to the holistic approach to student education. We as a cohort have had discussions before about what it means to educate students and to prepare them to function in society. They're not all going to go to college. We should make sure that they're prepared to go to college. But is there any discussion whatsoever about bringing back, I mean, a lot of arts courses or ROP type classes that existed when we went to school, that the students no longer get a chance to have the experience to be exposed to and to experience success and enjoyment?
Well, we do it through small learning communities. We have we have 2 schools of construction academies. We have culinary arts. And again, it goes back to my articulation. We have community colleges and as well as what we call skill centers. We have various skill centers around the district as well. When I was in my previous job, I actually sponsored a junior maritime program, which was an ROP program that I got through Great Davis for $400,000 to train young people to be merchant mariners coming out of high school making $30,000 to $40,000 a year. And so, but there is something called the A to G requirement. So that goes to the vision. And I'm sorry I didn't give you all the vision. The vision was college prepared, career ready. So even though you may be in a career tech or ROP program, as you all may remember it, you still have to be college prepared. So even if you are taking courses in a construction academy, for example, Santee High School has a construction academy, North Hollywood has a construction academy, and Building and Trades is trying to get us to open up some more. You still have to pass the A to G or college prep courses. In other words, we have to link, if you're studying electricity, then you have to understand algebra, you have to understand Ohm's law and things like that. And so to the extent that we take that career tech and apply the academic piece within the context of practical knowledge, then in essence, that's the way we're headed. My father was in the culinary arts, but he had a Bachelor of Science degree. Because he had to take chemistry, he had to take biology, he had to take all of those courses. Well, obviously, if you're going to be in the food business, you have to take chemistry. So the bottom line is that's how you start to draw the links that you need while still keeping their interests and making sure that they move into something that they really want to move into. At East LA Skills Center, for example, we were teaching kids how to be linemen. I had a young man on television, KLCS, with me the other day that's going to be a lineman. He's going to be working for Edison. And he's going to be climbing these poles, when I say lineman, I mean electrical wires. So he's going to be climbing his poles. Well, when you go to his class, you see all these formulas and stuff all over the blackboard. And so he is learning math in a different way, but still learning math. And to be very frank, if he decided that he wanted to go to college, he could transfer that knowledge and go to college. But in the meantime, as a 19-year-old, he's going to be making $70,000 a year climbing these poles. Okay. So there are ways to work that. And then even in our junior maritime program down in Sweetwater District, right outside of Coronado High School, these young people had to take some pretty rigorous academic courses, even though it was related to what we consider to be marine engineering, etc., and learning how to work on a ship.
I guess I agree 100%. So my question is, are those conversations you're having with your leaders? Because what we're seeing in the school sites, at least, and I've been in a couple of them, especially in places where I work in communities where they're ELLs, they're getting beat over the head with English. Yeah. We give them English, and then we give them reading, and then we give them DOWC, and for math, we're giving them math, and it's not an opportunity to do the application. So my question is, are you having those conversations with those leaders in those communities, because they're not.
It's very
it's something that you have control over.
In some districts,
when I see this